Okay, today's daf is daf Lamed Hey. We're going to start on the Mishnah, bottom of Lamed Bet, Lamed Daled Amud Bet, rather, to begin the new piece here. So the Mishnah says, "Nitano b'migdal ve'avad hamaftech." You put the eruv into some kind of closet structure, like we talked about the migdal. Literally, a migdal means some kind of tower. It's talking about a structure, like a closet or something. So you put it into a closet, but you lost the key. So not a good thing. So hareze eruv, it's still a good eruv because it's in there, and theoretically you could access it. So we're going to see how this works out in a second. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, no yodeh Hashem aftech b'mkomo eno eruv. Rabbi Eliezer says if you don't know where the key is, it's not an eruv. Why? Because you have no access to the food, and as we said, if you don't have access to the food, it cannot be a valid eruv. The Gemara says ve'amai hu b'makom echad ve'eruv b'makom acher. So why is it that according to the Tanakama, even though you lost your maftech, even though you lost your key, you're still considered to have a valid eruv? The bottom line is you have no access to the eruv. You are in one place, it's in another place. So how can that be a valid eruv? So the Gemara answers, we're talking here about a migdal of livanim. We're talking about a structure that's made of bricks, and these bricks are movable. Rabbi Meir, and it's Rabbi Meir. Because Rabbi Meir says you can open. In other words, if you have a brick structure, you can break through it and take what's inside. Okay? It's not as it says in the Mishnah. It says that if you have a house full of fruit and it gets broken into on Shabbat, not broken into by thieves, meaning, in other words, the wall gets breached on Shabbat. Prior to that, there was no way to get in. It was like a storehouse, but now it's broken open, so you can take from it. Rabbi Meir says you don't even have to wait for a natural disaster, for an act of God to open the side of this storehouse. You can break into it yourself. No problem, because it's destructive, it's not constructive. And what did we say? Amar Rav Nachman bar Ada, Amar Shmuel, but Rav Nachman bar Ada said that Shmuel said Ba'avira de livnei, Hachanami Ba'avira de livnei. We must be talking about a case where these bricks are not actually cemented together, because were they cemented together, you would really be involved in the Masekhet Soter. That would really be the malacha of dismantling or destroying. Okay, and we can't do that on Shabbat. So what he's talking about is a case where this structure is made of bricks that are lined up together, and they're arranged together in a format that's in a layout that constitutes a structure, but they themselves are not cemented together into a permanent structure. And since they're not cemented together into a structure, it's no problem to be able to break through them, because it's not considered a problem.
Just a quick question. I think we tried to get hold of it. Can we rehearse here?
Sure. Yeah, it's open.
9:30?
We're not doing anything in there. I don't think so. Yeah. So it must be talking about the same case. So if Rabbi Meir is talking about breaking through the wall, he must be only talking about a case where the wall is not cemented fully together, because if were it cemented together, then even he would agree that you could not. So this lines up everything. So basically we're talking about some kind of a structure made of bricks that are just placed together but not cemented, and therefore you can access your Eruv on Shabbat by moving the bricks aside. But then Rabbi Zera said that Rabbi Meir himself only permitted this moving of bricks on Yom Tov, but not on Shabbat. Because on Yom Tov you have a mitzvah of Simchat Yom Tov, you have a mitzvah to access the food, to bring joy to your Yom Tov meal, and therefore you're allowed to bend the rules a little bit, moving bricks around to get to this food. But on Shabbat you wouldn't be allowed to. So the Gemara concedes again, Achinami. So we'll say too, that B'Yom Tov, we're also talking about Yom Tov here. So they're conceding all the points. Okay, we're talking about loose bricks, we're talking about Yom Tov, not Shabbat. If that's true, Rabbi Eliezer says, Im ba'ir avad eruvo eruv, v'im basadeh avad in eruvo eruv, v'b'yom tov mali ir mali sadeh. So the Gemara says, we have a proof that our Mishnah must be talking about a case of Yom Tov, not Shabbat, where you set up an Eruvei Tchumin for Yom Tov and you put it inside this brick enclosure. Why? Because Rabbi Eliezer distinguishes and says, if the key is found in the city, then you're okay, because you can open up the door and get to it. If the key is found in the field, you're not okay. Okay, so he says, even if it's found in the city on Shabbat, how could you move it? You can't carry in a city on Shabbat. So if it's lost somewhere out in the fields, so then we say, okay, there's no way you could, you're not going to find it. But if it's lost in the city, how is it going to benefit you that it's lost in the city on Shabbat? You can't move it anyway. On Yom Tov, you could say, well, if it's lost in the city, maybe you could find it and bring it, because on Yom Tov you're allowed to carry. So that sort of supports the idea that we are speaking here about an eruv that was set up for Yom Tov. And Rashi says that even if you were to find your the key, then it would be on, you wouldn't be able to move it if it were Shabbat. So how is it going to help you? So therefore we see that from the fact that he distinguishes between where the key is lost in the city and where the key is lost in the field, we can conclude that we're talking about Yom Tov and not Shabbat. And in fact that makes sense. That's why Rabbi Meir allows you to break the wall open yourself. And Rabbi Eliezer doesn't allow you to do that, but he says that if you found the key in the city, you'd be able to bring it and open it. So it must be talking about Yom Tov. Now the Gemara says on Lamed Hey Amud Aleph, no, that's not true. We can amend our Mishnah to read as follows: if you put your food in a migdal, in a closet, and you closed it, and the key is lost, or is it eruv? This is still a good eruv. When is this speaking? B'Yom Tov. It's talking about Yom Tov. Aval b'Shabbat, but on Shabbat, en eruvo eruv. The eruv is invalid on Shabbat because there's no way to breach the wall. Even according to Rabbi Meir, there's no way to move the bricks aside on Yom Tov, on Shabbat rather. Nimtza mafteach. If you find the key, ben ba'ir ben basadeh, wherever you find it, en eruvo eruv. Okay, so then the eruv is not going to be an eruv. Okay. In other words, even if it on Shabbat, this is speaking about Shabbat. Wherever you find the key, it's not going to be. You're not going to be able to bring this key to open the closet anyway. So whether it's found in the field or it's found in the city, you're not going to be able to bring it into this area to open the closet to get your eruv out.
Even if you had the key.
Well, I guess that I guess normally the key was right there. So they would just open it, but you wouldn't have to transport it. I'm assuming that that's how it worked. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Ba'ir eruvo eruv, Basadein eruvo eruv. That Ba'ir eruvo eruv ki Rabbi Shimon, the Amar echad gagot ve'echad chatzar ve'echad karpefot, reshut achaten lakelim sheshavtu b'tochan, Basadein eruvo eruv ki Rabbanan. So basically what he says is that there's a way that you can have a distinction between where the key is found, even on Shabbat. Why? Because on Shabbat, if the key is in a chatzer, let's say the key is found within, remember the cities are made up of multiple courtyards. So to carry within a courtyard, as long as you have an eruvei chatzerot, is okay. What about to carry from one courtyard to another? What about to carry from one roof to another? So according to Rabbi Shimon, all outdoor spaces that are enclosed, anything that's left in an outdoor space, let's say you left your bicycle in an outdoor space, you could move that bicycle from one chatzer to another chatzer, from the roof to the chatzer. You don't need any special thing because anything that's left in the chatzer, any outdoor enclosure, as long as you don't have to bring that thing through the public domain, you jump over the fence from one chatzer to the other, you jump over that fence from one chatzer to the next one. Even though those chatzerot don't have any relationship with one another, it doesn't matter. As long as it was in the chatzer, they're all considered one reshut. The problem is when you want to carry something from your house to the chatzer, or from the chatzer into the house. But from chatzer to chatzer, it's no problem. So according to Rabbi Shimon, if you found the key in one of the chatzerot, within the city, in other words, within one of the chatzerot, such that it wouldn't have to be carried outside, it doesn't have to be carried in an unenclosed area, in an open area, in a Reshut HaRabim, it just has to be carried from one chatzer to the next. So there, it's okay. Because he says that anything that's left in one of the outdoor enclosures can be moved to another outdoor enclosure without any kind of special fix. So that's why he said within the city, you're good. If you found it out in the field, the key, now there's nothing you can do, because out in the field, you can't bring from out in the field into the chatzer. And we're assuming that this migdal, this closet, is in an enclosure. Okay? So even if you found the key in another enclosure, in another chatzer, you could transport it according to Rabbi Shimon, but you couldn't transport it from outside into the enclosure. So that's why it's distinguishing. But from in the city, for sure, there's nothing that you can do. If you find the key, in the city, in the field, there's nothing you can do about it. Okay, that you're not going to be able to transport the key from outside inside. And since Rabbi Eliezer holds that there's no way you can break through the side of this closet, like Rabbi Meir would allow you to break through the side of the closet, let's say in Yom Tov, the rabbis never allow you to do that. So you're going to be, if you don't have the key, you're going to be stuck according to Rabbi Eliezer, basically. Okay, the only thing is, if you find the key within one of the chatzerot, then on Shabbat you'd be able to bring the key.
And the only reason that the field versus in the city was mentioned was because of this business of being able to carry from chatzer through the whole city. Is that right? There's nothing else about not carrying from the field into...
You can't carry from the field because it's a real public domain. The chatzer is really not a public domain. It's really enclosed. That would be a problem.
But it's on Shabbat, though. We're only talking about Shabbat.
We're talking about Shabbat, right? I know Yom Tov you can carry anywhere, right? But there the issue is, could you break through the wall on Yom Tov? So Rabbi Meir allows you to even break through the wall as long as the bricks are not cemented. Rabbi Eliezer won't allow you to do that. He says you have to have the key. Find the key somewhere. But when he talked about finding the key in the city versus finding it in the field, he was talking about Shabbat. Because in the city means within one of the enclosures. In the field means that it's in the public domain. Now the problem that I was wondering was before when he says, it's a good proof that it must be talking about Yom Tov because it says if you find the key in the city you could bring it. But why would he say if you find the key in the field you can't bring it? That's sort of against the idea that it's Yom Tov, because if it were Yom Tov it would be, then you'd be allowed to bring the key from anywhere. So that's why in the end the Mishnah is amended, or the Braitot are amended to reflect this. So on Yom Tov you could the machloket is, can you break through the wall or not? Because everybody agrees that if you found the key you could bring it. Can you break through the wall or not? On Shabbat, the question is, where is the key found? Is it found in the? Is it found in an enclosure? In which case, according to Rabbi Shimon, you could bring it, or is it found out in the public domain where you couldn't bring it? Now, according to the Chachamim who are against Rabbi Shimon, even if it's found in the wrong chatzer, you couldn't bring it. So, but if we're following Rabbi Shimon, then we would say even if it's found in a neighboring chatzer, as long as you don't have to go outside of an enclosure to bring it, you're okay.
And the assumption is that the Eruv is located. The tower is located
in some enclosure. So now we say like this. So, and by the way, the Bach takes out the words up to Kirabanan because it doesn't really fit. Where it says Basadeh in Eruv Kirabanan, it doesn't really fit as the Bach says there. So anyway, so now Rabbav Rav Yosef Tamrei Tarvayu. Rabban Rav Yosef say forget about this whole bricks and all this, this thing that we've set up till now. Forget about this concept. It's a different concept here. What are we talking about here? Da'amrei Tarvayu Hachab Migdal Shel Etzaskinam. We're talking about a wooden closet, not a brick closet. Demar Savar Kalihu ve'in binyan b'kelim ve'in stira b'kelim, because Rabbi Meir says that a wooden closet is not considered to be is considered to be rather not a structure but a keli. It's considered a vessel. Okay, it's considered a vessel. And a vessel, there's en binyan v'stira b'kelim, that when it comes to kelim, when it comes to vessels, there's no building or demolishing of kelim. It's only of structures. So how do we look at this wooden closet? Is it a structure or is it a vessel? So according to Rabbi Meir, it's a vessel. You can break through it. Umar savar oelhu. And the other one says, Rabbi Eliezer says, no, it's an ohel. It's a structure. You can't dismantle a structure on Shabbat. So that would be the machloket. So forget about the whole thing about the bricks and talk about Yom Tov and with Shabbat and all that. We don't need that. The case here is that it's whether Shabbat or Yom Tov. The question is, can you break through the side because en stira b'kelim? Because really, it's only a vessel. It's not considered, according to Rabbi Meir, to be a structure, as opposed to the rabbis who consider this a structure. Or I'm sorry, Rabbi Eliezer who considers it a structure, and therefore we'll say you can't break through it because breaking a structure is not allowed on Shabbat. And they're following the same machloket as the following Tanaim. The Tana, as it says in the Mishnah, Hikish al gabei shida teva umigdal temein. Rabbi Nechemia, Rabbi Shimon mitarin. This is talking about a zav. A zav is somebody who has certain kinds of emissions from his body, from his reproductive organs that are not normal. They're not the normal kinds of emission, but some kind of a disorder. He has a severe tum'ah. Now, if he were to bang on a shida teva umigdal, these are various kinds of structures made usually of wood. A migdal is a closet, as we said. A teva is some kind of a chest. A shida could be some kind of a carriage or some other kind of a small structure. So if he bangs on any of these things, tamein. Now we're assuming that he did not, by the way, touch them directly. He's wearing gloves or he hits them with a stick. Because if he touched it directly, nobody is going to question that anything touched by the zav is going to become tameh. But here it's called tumat heset, which means he moved it he was wearing a glove, he knocked it and he moved it, but he didn't actually touch its skin. His skin didn't touch it directly. He was wearing a glove. Okay? So the rabbis say, Tame'in. All these things, because they were moved by the Zav, are Tameh, even though he didn't directly touch them. And Rabbi Nechemia and Rabbi Shimon are Mitaher. My love, Bahama Kipale, Ge. Is this not the Machloket? Mar Savar Kelihu, or Mar Savar Oilu. That according to the first opinion, it's a vessel, and therefore when he moves it, like any other vessel, it's Mikabel Tum'ah. It's going to become tamei. But according to Rabbi Nechemia and Rabbi Shimon, it's not considered to be a vessel. It's considered to be an ohel. It's like a structure. And just like if the zav pushes your house, it's not going to make your house tamei. If he pushes this closet, it's not going to make it tamei because it's not looked at as a vessel. It's looked at as a structure. Okay? So that's what the Gemara says so far. But now we have an objection to this. Amar Abaye says, V'tizbara, is that really possible to explain the machloket that way? V'hatani we learned in a braita, oil v'nisat tameh. Keli v'eno nisat tahor. We said in a braita that even if you move a structure like an ohel, it will become tameh if the zav moves it. So that can't be the machloket.
What's the word v'nisat?
To be moved. To be moved. So if a vessel is not moved, it's tahor. Even if the zav touches it, but he's wearing glove, it's tahor. But if he moves it, it's going to be tameh. And even an ohel, even a structure that's moved by the zav will be tameh. So how could they argue about that? They're not arguing about that. Because everybody would agree if he moved it, it would be tameh. So therefore, what do we say? V'katani sefan, it says at the end of that Mishnah, or Braita rather, v'im hayu nisotin tmeim, if they were moved, they'll be tameh. Ze'aklal nisat mechamat kochot tameh, mechamat ra'adat tahor. The rule is that if his strength, in other words, if he were to bang on the closet and it actually jumps and moves, then it's definitely tameh. But if he bangs his foot on the ground and the ground shakes and the vessel moves as a result of the ground shaking, then it's too indirect. It's going to be tahor. Okay, so v'hachabir adam echamat kocho askinan, and Abaye says this machloket about the closet that we mentioned in the Braita, it has nothing to do with whether a closet is a structure or a vessel. It has to do with something else. Adam echamat kocho ubaka mipalge demar savar have heset demar savar ado have heset. The question here is if the zav bangs on the item, okay, and it shakes, but it doesn't actually change position. It doesn't actually move. So it was direct because he was wearing a glove, so it didn't touch his skin. But he banged on this closet, and the closet shakes, but doesn't actually move out of place. So is that considered heset? So the rabbis say that is heset. It's still considered to be moving it because it shook. According to Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Nechemia, since it didn't change position, it's not moving. Okay, but that has absolutely nothing to do with our case of whether you can break into this migdal, this closet, to get to your eruv on Shabbat. And now how is Abaye going to explain our Mishnah, since he said that machloket about whether a closet is a structure or a vessel doesn't exist? That's not a machloket at all. So how is he going to explain the machloket between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Meir here? Abaye v'Ravad Rami Tarvayo. He says, "B'man'ul v'katir b'mitna askinan, u'ba'e sakina lamifsekei." We're talking about a case where it's locked up and tied up with strong ropes, and the only way you can get through it is with a knife to cut. You're going to have to cut through with a knife. Tanaka masavar like Rabbi Yosei, the Amar kol hakelim nitalin b'Shabbat chutz mimasar gadol v'yatet shel machresha. That the Tanaka Rabbi Meir holds like Rabbi Yosei, who says you can move any object. You can move what's called keli shemelachto le'isur. You can move something which is designated for a prohibited use on Shabbat, if right now you're using it for a permitted use, except for Masara Gadol, a large saw, which was only used for professional purposes, and Yatecho Macharesha, and the piece that goes on the animal that when he plows, right, for plowing the field, because these are things that would never be used for anything else, ever. But anything that has multiple uses, and it just happens to be that it's usually used for prohibited things, but you want to use it for a permitted thing, it's okay. So you're going to bring your knife. Normally, what is a knife used for? Cutting food. You're going to bring your knife in order to cut the rope to get into this migdal, to get into the closet, because it's tied up with a rope.
There's no key.
So the question, right, there's no key. So is this muktzeh or not? Is it muktzeh to use can you use the sakin, can you use the knife for this or not? So according to Rabbi Meir, yes you can. For Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Eliezer says, Rabbi Nechemia, that he holds like Rabbi Nechemia, who says that even a talit, even a spoon, you can only pick up a spoon for the purpose of using a spoon, which is eating soup or something like that, eating liquid. You can only pick up a talit for the purpose of wearing it. You can't say, I'm going to use this talit to fan somebody. So he holds like the strictest interpretation of muktzeh, which is the interpretation of Rabbi Nechemia that we learned in Masekhet Shabbat, who says you even permitted things you can only use for the purpose that they're designated, not for another purpose. So that's why he says there's no way you're going to be able to access this closet, because this closet is tied with rope that would require a knife to cut it. A knife is only for food purposes, according to Rabbi Nechemiah, so it's muktzeh, you can't use it. Rabbi Meir says, no, you can use a knife for whatever purpose is permitted, and therefore you can cut through the rope in order to open the closet and get to the food. So that's how Abaye is interpreting the machloket here, that we're talking about a case where you have a regular migdal, and the question is whether you're allowed to use a knife to cut open the rope for the migdal or not. Okay, unlike the first interpretation of the Mishnah that understood it as talking about a brick structure and talking about being on Yom Tov and all that. So now we come to the new Mishnah. New Mishnah says, "Nitgalgel chutz latchum nafal alav gal lo nisraf teruma v'nitmet miba'od yom." I'm sorry, o nisraf teruma v'nitmet miba'od yom eno eruv mishachashecha reza eruv. Let's say you have an eruv that you set up perfectly right. It's the right type of food. It's in the right place, but something went wrong. After you set it up, it rolled beyond the tuchum. Remember, when you set up an Eruvei Tchumin, where you place it has to be within 2,000 amot of where you're going to be coming from. So let's say you put these Eruv Tchumin outside of the border of your city, and it's 2,000 amot, exactly 2,000 amot from where you're going to be staying. And you're going to want to walk to there in the morning and walk 2,000 amot more. It allows you 2,000 amot more. Correct? But you need to be able to reach that spot. If you put your Eruvei Tchumin 3,000 amot from the city that you're staying in, there's no way you can even get there on Shabbat. So it's useless. So what happens if you set it up exactly at the right place, but it rolled outside of the Tchum, and now it's outside of your reach? Or what happened if you put food there, or rocks fell on it, there was an avalanche and rocks covered it, now you can't get to it. Or nisraf, it burnt up. Or it was hit by lightning. Or it was teruma and it became tme'ah. Teruma tme'ah is not edible to anybody. So we said that you could use teruma possibly. According to some, you could use teruma, but you can't use truma tme'ah because impure truma is not acceptable for anybody to eat. Not even a kohen can eat it. So what happens if it became tamei? It depends. If this mishap occurred before the sun set, your eruv was never an eruv. Because when Shabbat started, it wasn't there. If the sun set and then one of these terrible things happened, the avalanche came, the lightning struck, the thing became tamei, whatever it was, then it's already good because it took effect as of sunset. So we don't care what happens after that. So the Mishnah goes on. Im safek. What if you're not sure? You don't know whether this mishap occurred once Shabbat had already started or before Shabbat started. If it happened before Shabbat started, you never had an eruv to begin with. But you don't know. Rabbi Meir will tell you. Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda, Omrim Harezeh Chamar Gamal. According to Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda, you are like a driver of a camel and a chamor. You are like somebody who is driving a camel and a donkey at the same time. In other words, you're going to be pulled in both directions. We have to be stringent on both sides. Meaning to say, in case the eruv really was good, remember, your house is, let's say, to the east. Your eruv is to the west. So what the eruv was going to allow you to do was walk to the west 2,000 amot, and then another 2,000 amot past the eruv. Now, we're not sure if your eruv was good. Now, if your eruv was good, that means you could walk 2,000 amot to the west, plus another 2,000 amot. But it also means you couldn't even take one step to the east, because you put yourself to the west. So what Rabbi Meir is saying and Rabbi Yehuda are saying is, you're caught with the stringencies of both. You can't take a step to the east because maybe your eruv really was good and you bought the extra space to the west. But you can't go past where your eruv is to the west because maybe the eruv really wasn't valid. So you can only go 2,000 amot to the west. You can't go 4,000 amot. You can only go 2. What? It's a doubt. That's why you have to cover both. You don't know whether the eruv was valid or not. Since you don't know when it became invalidated. So you're stuck on both. You have to be stringent that maybe it really was valid and therefore I can't go to the east. You have to be stringent, maybe it wasn't valid and therefore I can't go further to the west than I would have been able to go.
But there's got to be something that makes you think maybe it's not valid. You're in your house.
Yeah, you're not sure because you found that it was burnt up and you don't know if it was burnt up after before the sun set or not. You left it there at 5 o'clock in the afternoon.
And you can walk over.
Now you went over there and you see that it's totally burnt. Can you continue walking or not? So that's the question, right? Or you come there in the morning and it's gone. So it rolled away. You don't know where it rolled to, or somebody ate it, or an animal ate it, but you don't know when. Okay, so that's the problem. So that's what Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda say. Rabbi Yosef and Rabbi Shimon Omrim Safek Eruv Kasher. They say a Safek Eruv is Kasher. If you're in doubt when the Eruv became invalid, it's Kasher. Amar Rabbi Yosef Avtulmus. Rabbi Yosef Avtulmus said, He'id mishum chamisha zekenim. it was testified in front of, because of, in the name of 5 elders, al Safek Eruv shekasher, that a doubtful Eruv is kasher. So he gave a tradition, he brought a tradition that a Safek Eruv is kasher. So if you're not sure when it became invalid, you can assume the best, not the worst. Not like Rabbi Meir that you have to be caught with both possibilities. The Gemara says, "Nitgalgel chutz l'tchum." Amar Rava says, "Lo shenu nitgalgel chutz 4 amot, aval l'toch 4 amot, anoten rovo yesh lo yigdal amot." Rava says, if your eruv rolled away, so you're at exactly the 2,000 amot line, and you put your eruv right there, and it rolled forward, it rolled past. So now it's outside of the range to where you can walk. You can't actually walk to your eruv now on Shabbat because it rolled away. He says, if it's within 4 amot. That's allowed because we give you 4 amot. So if it rolled 6 amot away from the line, it's no good. But if it rolled only within 4 amot, you're still good. Nafal alav gal. If an avalanche came and fell onto your eruv, what do we do? So the assumption here is, the Gemara says, that if you wanted you could take it. In other words, that it's accessible to you, it just has rocks on it. So, lema matnitin like a Rebbe. Obviously, our Mishnah is not following Rebbe. Obviously, this is not the opinion of Rebbe, because according to Rebbe, anything that's only rabbinically prohibited, you're allowed to do it during Ben HaShemashot. And here, what would you be able to do? You could just push the rocks aside. They're muktzeh, but that's only rabbinic. You could push the rocks aside and take your eruv. What's the problem? So obviously we're not following Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, because Rabbi Yehuda Nasi would say this isn't a problem. So the Gemara says, "Afilu teimaka Rabbi lo tzricha debaimara v'chatina." Not true, because even Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi would agree that if you need serious tools to get this out, in other words, you need a shovel, you need a pick to be able to dig these rocks out, that's considered a malacha on Shabbat, because if it's in a field, it's considered like choresh. You're preparing the land by digging out the rocks. And if it's in a house, if it's in an enclosure, it's like boneh. It's like you're building, you're improving the grounds of your house by moving these rocks around. So since it's a real actual activity with tools, it's not considered just a moving around of rocks. It's not easily accessible. Even Rabbi Yehuda is going to say that's not something you could have done during Ben HaShemashot. And since it would require an actual bona fide milacha to get to your eruv, it's not valid. So then the Gemara says, and you need all of these cases. Why? Because the itana nitgalgel mishum deleta gabe aval nafa alav deita gabe ema leheve eruv. Because if we only had the case where your eruv rolls out of range, so then you might have said, well, rolling out of range is different, because rolling out of range, it's not near me, but if it's under a pile of rocks, it's still right here. I just can't get to it. So maybe that would be more lenient. And on the other hand, you might say the opposite. You might say that if it rolled, that's actually better. Why? Because it could roll back. Maybe the wind will blow it back. But if it's covered with rocks, there's no way to access it. So therefore, we have to tell both cases. You might have thought that being covered in an avalanche was more lenient, because at least it's right next to me. Rolling away from me is far away. Alternatively, you might have thought that rolling away is more lenient because it's still extant, as opposed to being under the rocks where it's not accessible. And so therefore we need both cases to tell us that both of them would eliminate the eruv if it happened before the sunset. If an avalanche covered the eruv to the point that you would require actual tools to excavate it out, or if the eruv rolled outside of the range, more than 4 amot past that 2,000 amot line, so then everybody would agree if that happened before sunset, the eruv was never there when it needed to be there, and therefore it's not valid. If that happened on Shabbat itself, after the sunset, then it would be valid, because as soon as the sun sets, that's when we look at whether the eruv is in the right place.
And how are you going to know that?
If you don't know, then you get into the machloket about the safek. Okay, if you were sitting there, the point is you need to know. If you don't know, then it's a safek, and that's the machloket that we saw in the Mishnah between the rabbis about what do you do in a case of safek. Now, nisraf terumav nitmet. So if you had a burnt up eruv, or it was Truma and it became Tameh. So, Lama li Tana Nisraf. Why does the Tana have to mention the case where the eruv is burnt? Lo diachai kochot Rabbi Yosef, to teach you the strength of Rabbi Yosef, that even though it burnt up, okay, we still say that in a case of Safek, we're going to be lenient. Right? That according to Rabbi Yosef, he's so lenient that even if it burnt up completely and it's not here at all anymore, the fact that we don't know when that happened gives us leeway. And Tanat Truma v'nitmed lo de'ach kochod Rabbi Meir, that the case of the Truma that becomes Tame'ah is to show you the strength of Rabbi Meir, how stringent he is, that even though it's right here, we know it became Tameh, we don't know when it became Tameh. Rabbi Meir is still going to be stringent and say that you can't, that Eruv is invalid because we don't know when it became Tameh, and it might have become Tameh before the sunset. Does Rabbi Meir really hold that a safek like this should be treated stringently? We learned in the Mishnah that if a Tameh person goes down into the mikveh to do tevilah, Safek taval, safek lo taval. It's a safek whether he actually immersed or not. In other words, we don't know if his entire body was submerged or not. Vafilu taval, even if we know he submerged, but safek taval ba'arba'im sa'ah, safek lo taval ba'arba'im sa'ah. But we're not sure if there were actually 40 sa'ah of water in the mikveh. It might have been diminished. We're not sure. We find out, let's say, that there's less water than we thought there was, and we're not sure when that happens. It's a safek. Okay, safek lo taval ba'arba'im sa'ah. Okay, b'chein shnei mikvaot. Similarly, you have two mikvaot. V'achat yesh ba'arba'im sa'ah, or v'achat en ba'arba'im sa'ah. You have two mikvaot. One of them has the requisite amount of water, and one doesn't. And you don't know v'taval b'achat men ve'eno yodeh be'ezeh men taval. He can't remember which mikveh he went into. So in that case, safekot tameh, in all those cases, the safek is tameh. We don't know if he really did tevilah or not. He was definitely tameh. We don't know if he actually did a proper immersion, either because we don't know if the performance was right, we don't know if there was enough water, we don't know which mikveh he went into. Bamed dvarim amorim, when is this said? Betumah chamura, with a stringent tumah, meaning a biblical tumah. When can a person become tameh? Only from an ava tumah. So it has to be from an ava tumah, one of the primary sources of tumah. Aval betumah kala, kigon shachal ochalin tmein v'shatamashkin tmein. But when you're dealing with rabbinic tumah, which is called here light tumah, lenient tumah, such as when you ate a certain quantity of food that was tameh, the rabbis decreed tumah on you. Even though a person cannot normally become tameh from a food, they said if you eat a certain amount of tameh food, you will become tameh. Or if a person takes drawn water and his body, remember we learned in Masekhet Shabbat that if the majority of someone's body and their head has mayim she'uvim, drawn water poured over it, he becomes tameh. And they did that because they didn't want people to think that was effective for mikveh, because people used to take a shower after they went to the mikveh and they thought, oh, the shower is the mikveh. No. So they said if you take a shower, basically, that you would be tameh. So because we're not concerned about tumah. We're only concerned about whether the person is nida or not. We don't care if they're tameh for the Beit HaMikdash. For the Beit HaMikdash, taking the shower would make them, they couldn't go into the Beit HaMikdash. But it's a separate tumah. It doesn't mean that you're tameh the way you were before.
No, but after Tevilah
you can take a shower, yeah. So, or water. So one is that you immersed in drawn water. Okay, that's taking a bath. The second one is haba'al rosho val rubo. You poured it over you. That's more like a shower. Okay, 3 lug of drawn water. V'yarad lidbol, and you went down to the mikveh. Safek taval, safek lo taval, v'afilo taval, safek taval ba'arba'im sa, safek lo taval ba'arba'im sa. V'chen shnei mikvaot ba'achat yesh ba'arba'im sa, ba'achat en ba'arba'im sa, v'taval ba'achat. So all the same cases as before. In other words, either you didn't know whether you fully immersed in the mikveh. You were tameh only on a rabbinic level because you took a shower that day, or because you went to the bath, took a bath that day, or because you ate food that was tameh. You're rabbinically tameh, and now you have a safek. You don't know which mikveh you went to. You don't know if the mikveh had enough water. You don't know if you immersed properly. Safekot tahor. In that case, you're tahor. Why? Because it's safek d'Rabbanan. Safek d'Rabbanan were lenient. Rabbi Yosef mitameh. Rabbi Yosef says no, you're tameh. And we'll see why Rabbi Yosef says that later. Kasavar Rabbi Meir. So the problem is, all stam mishnayot we assume are Rabbi Meir. That's a general principle in Shas. Any mishnah that doesn't have an author is Rabbi Meir. So Rabbi Meir is the one saying here that if you have a safek d'Rabbanan, we're not machmir. Techumin, eruvei techumin is d'Rabbanan, rabbinic. So the answer is Kasavar Rabbi Meir, techumin deoraita. Obviously Rabbi Meir holds techum is deoraita then. It must be biblical. Because if it were rabbinic, then he would apply the same rule and say that a safek is safek d'Rabbanan lenient. Okay, v'hatanan, but we learned in the Mishnah, im en yachol lehavli'o bazo, amar Rabbi Dostai bar Yanai, mishum Rabbi Meir shamati, shemikadrin beharim. What is this talking about? It's talking about measuring techomin. You measure a techom. How do you measure it? They would measure it by taking 50 amma tape measure, basically, ruler, whatever it was, string, okay, a string for a tape measure, and they would have two people. One would stand with it at their chest level, one would stand with it at their chest level, and they would count 50 amot at a time till they got to the 2,000 amot. So 20 times they would do that, right? Or 40 times they would do that to get to the 2,000 amot. Now, what happens if there's a hill? There's a hill, so then the guy number one will have to stand at the foot of the hill, guy number two is going to stand on the top, and they're going to have to take out the hill, they're going to have to subtract the hill from the space, right? Because there's a hill. Right. Not as the crow flies, because really, as the man walks, because they're going to have to do it as you walk. So they're going to have to do the upper part of the hill and then down, instead of as the crow flies. As the crow flies, well, you would want to, but so every other case, as we're going to see, for all biblical mitzvot, as we're going to see, you have to take the actual walking distance. So if you would have to walk over this hill, that means you're going to have to measure it just like you. So even though you're going to lose relative, if you cut a straight line through the hill, you would have spent a lot less of your space. But you're going to have to measure the incline and the descent of the hill. You're going to end up losing a lot of space. So he says that I heard Rabbi Dostai says, Im en yachol lahavli'o. Im en yachol lahavli'o means if it's just a little bump, a hill, where I could stand on one side, you could stand on the other side of the bump, and we could go over it, right? Then we don't have to count the incline, because our string can reach over it without having to stand up. But if it doesn't work that way, if you actually have to stand on the incline and measure it because you can't extend the string over the hill, so then what are you going to do in that case? You're going to have he says, shemikadrin beharim, you can pierce through the hill. What does it mean to pierce through the hill? Rashi explains what that means is that what you would do is you would have the guy standing at the foot of the hill and a guy standing at the peak of the hill, let's imagine, and the guy at the bottom will hold it at his chest, the guy at the top will hold it at his foot. So what will happen? Basically, it will minimize. It'll be on an angle that it's almost a straight line, let's say, because let's say the chest with one guy is going to be parallel to, we're assuming the hill is not that high, it's not a mountain, is going to be parallel to the foot of the other guy. So you're actually minimizing the amount that you have to subtract from your incline rather than doing it up the incline. You're standing, one guy's standing with it at his chest level, the other guy stands with it at his foot level, and they cut a straight line there, and they do the other thing on the other side with a 4 amma string, and this way they're able to basically diminish in some way the amount of space that's being spent as a result of the hill. That's what he says for techomin. He says, I heard this from Rabbi Meir, but what do you see from that? And ve'isal gadatach techomin deoraita. If you're telling me that techum is deoraita, mi mekadrin, do we do this kind of funny business with a biblical commandment? We don't. Va'amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rabba bar Ravua, that Rav Nachman said, that Rabba bar Ravua said, en mekadrin lo ba'arei miklat lo ba'egla arufa. If we want to measure the techum, we want to measure the distance of the egla for the arei miklat, the cities of refuge. The cities of refuge, not only do they protect, but even their techum, their outskirts protect the inadvertent murderer from being killed by the goel adam. So by the person who's avenging the blood. So as long as he's within the city limits, he's okay. How do we measure the city limits? Since it's a biblical commandment that the Ir Miklat protect the Rotzeach, he protect the murderer. So when we measure, we can't just cut through the mountain in this creative way. We actually have to measure every step that it takes to go up the mountain and down the mountain. We can't do any kind of creative ways of minimizing the interruption in the Techum. We have to be totally honest with the amount that it actually takes, the amount of space it actually takes to walk it. So if that's the case in biblical commandments, and similarly with Egla Arufa is where you find the dead body, a homicide's been committed and we don't know who did it. So we have to measure who is the closest city, and the elders of that city come and they do the ritual of decapitating the calf and washing their hands and saying we didn't have anything to do with this murder and so on. So you need to do that. You need to measure from the closest city. And how do we measure the closest city? We don't compensate for hills that intervene. We count the hills fully, because it's a biblical commandment. But you're telling me that Rabbi Meir says that techomin is biblical. So why doesn't he apply the same standard to techomin as he does to these other cases? The answer is that lo kashya, no problem. Because it says about those two cases, mipnei shehin shel Torah, implying that Rabbi Meir must not hold that techomin is biblical. So the answer is lo kashe, no problem. Hadide hadrabe. That one is himself speaking. He himself holds that eruvei techumin, that the concept of techum is biblical. So he himself would be strict. The only thing is, had dirabeh, when he was reporting how you can compensate for the hills, you can imagine as if you're penetrating a line through the hill. That was what his teacher said. Dekanami, we can see a proof for this. Dekatani bazo amar Rabbi Dostai bar Yanai, because it said in this matter, Rabbi Dostai bar Yanai said, Mishum Rabbi Meir, in the name of Rabbi Meir, Shamati shemikadrin beharim. That what Rabbi Meir said is, I heard from my teacher that you can do this special thing of cutting through the mountain. But that was what he heard. That wasn't what he personally held. He personally held you couldn't do that because he personally held that techum is deoraita, and that's why he rules on a safek of techum that it's also lechumra, stringent. Virame, so Shemamina, that's a good conclusion. Virame deoraita adeoraita le Rabbi Meir. But we can show a contradiction in deoraita to deoraita for Rabbi Meir also. Because it says in the Mishnah, you touched a person in the night and you don't know if he was alive or dead. And in the morning you wake up and he's dead. So what do you assume he was when you touched him in the night? Rabbi Meir says, you're tahor. We just look at, we don't assume that he was alive, that he was dead when you touched him. We assume he just died now. According to the rabbis, we look at your latest situation. The latest situation is the person's dead, and you assume that you touched him, he was also dead. Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah says, so what's the problem? The problem is that according to Rabbi Meir, you're telling me, Rabbi Meir, that there is that in deoraitas, you're going to be strict. Right, that's why the tum'ah case of the mikveh before, we were strict. And you're telling me that techumin, why are you strict? Because it's deoraita. What about this case? It's deoraita also. Why aren't you saying it's a safek whether you touched a dead person or not? Safek deoraita l'chumra. Why is it not stringent? L'chumra it should be. So the Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah says, Mishnatenu, our Mishnah shaya aleh sheretz kol ben hashemashot. Okay, that our Mishnah is talking about a case where there was a sheret, the whole ben hashemashot, on the food. Okay, in other words, we know that the food became tamei from a sheret. That's what Rashi says. That mitchilato ve'ad sofo devadai idmei mi ba'od yom dechilat ben hashemashot me'erev Shabbati. That when we talk about the case that everybody agrees upon, we're talking about a sheret that was on it from the beginning of Shabbat until through Ben Hashmashot. So we know that it was definitely tamei. If that's true, how is that a safek then? How is that a doubt? If we know that there was a sheret, we know that there was a dead rodent on this food all along, so why is it a doubt? So the answer is because Rabba and Rav Yosef answered that you have two groups of witnesses. This is the problem. Okay? That Rabbi Meir, when you have a chazakah, you have a presumption. So Rabbi Meir is dealing with deoraitas here. Generally, a safek deoraita is l'chumra, safek derabanan is l'kula. But when you have a chazakah, you have a presumption, we can rely on a presumption. So when it comes to touching the dead guy, even though that's a deoraita, you have a presumption that you were tahor. And he has a presumption that he was alive. Okay? But you have a presumption that you were tahor, so we don't want to ruin that presumption without proof positive. And we don't have proof positive that when you touched him, he was dead.
This is a witness.
Right. So, but what about in our case? We're talking about where there were two conflicting sets of witnesses. Two witnesses came and said, we saw that it became tamei and it was still daytime. Therefore, your eruv is invalid. And the other two witnesses say, no, it became tamei, but it became tamei when it was already nighttime. So it actually took effect before it became tamei. So it's good. So what does Rabbi Meir say? So Rashi explains that ubaha pelige Rabbi Yossi, and this is the machloket, because Rabbi Yossi says hold okay terei levahade terei okay teruma achazaka kamaita. That Rabbi Yossi says these two witnesses cancel one another out because they contradict one another. So what are we left with if they cancel each other out? We're left with our original presumption that the eruv was good. Okay, so therefore you're okay. So Rabbi Meir savar kevan deika kat de mafkale mechezke besfeka deoraita lo azinan batar chazaka. That once you have two witnesses that say it was tamei before the sunset, that's enough to ruin its presumption. Okay, so Rabbi Yossi looks at the two witnesses, they cancel each other out, and since they cancel each other out, you're left with your presumption of innocence, so to speak. Rabbi Meir says no, they don't cancel each other out. They now throw it, because you have two witnesses saying that it became tameh beforehand, that throws your presumption into doubt. So even though it doesn't prove anything because there are contradictory witnesses, we now have a legitimate doubt about it. Since you have two witnesses saying yes, two witnesses saying no, yes, halachically they cancel each other out, but they also cast dispersions. How can you say no? How can you say you have a presumption now that you have doubt? Like when that meat store in California that's been in the news about how they have this footage of the guy bringing boxes in. Once you start questioning things and you have evidence, you don't know what to do. So it's a safek, and since Rabbi Meir holds it safek deoraita lechumra, that a safek deoraita, and he holds techumin is deoraita, he's going to be machmir. What about the case of the dead body? So he says over there, aval benogea be'achad balayla, then kad motziato mechazkato makminan le kol halayla b'chazkato. In other words, there you don't have any witnesses. You don't know that the guy was dead, so you assume that you are cheskat tahora, you are pure. We give you your presumption of purity. But where you have two witnesses, true, we don't accept the witnesses as definite because they're contradicted by the other pair of witnesses, but that doesn't mean that I can just go along Pollyannishly with my rose-colored glasses and think that there's no question here. There's a question. And we can turn to Lamed Vav Umud Aleph. Rava says, Hatam trei chayzke lekula. There's another reason that there's a difference here. Rashi says, Gabe nagabi achad nami, afilu yeshne kita edim. Even if you had the same case by the dead body of the two witnesses said he was dead already when you touched him, and two said that he wasn't. Still, you have two chazakot over there. Why? Because one chazaka is you have a cheskat tahora. You touched the dead body, but you have a cheskat tahora that you are pure. And a person has a chazakah that they're alive until proven dead. So there are actually two chazakot over there. V'chachada chazakah lekula. But here we have only one chazakah over here. Why do we have only one chazakah over here? Some say it should say l'chumra. Okay, here we have only one chazakah in our Mishnah. Why? Because the chazakah was that the truma should remain tahor. But this chazakah is uprooted, is compromised by the presence of these witnesses, according to Rabbi Meir. So Rabbi Meir might go so far as to say that even in the case of the dead body, if you had the two pairs of witnesses contradicting each other, we still would say you're tahor. Why? Because you have two chazakot. One is that I'm tahor, and the other one is that the guy was alive till the last possible minute. So in any case, there's a distinction between the cases, and we could say that Rabbi Meir actually holds techumin deoraita. So once you have a legitimate safek related to techumin, he's going to rule stringently. And in this case, since we have a legitimate safek about when this eruv became invalidated, we have testimony that's contradictory. So therefore, we have a legitimate safek. It uproots the cheskat kashrut of the eruv, but which would also mean, by the way, that if you didn't have anything to invalidate it, you don't have to wonder. You don't have to automatically wonder. It's just once you have evidence, we have to start wondering, when did this happen? Okay, and how did this happen? And so therefore, it would seem that if you, for instance, even Rabbi Meir would agree that if you were to leave this eruv and you come back the next day and you see a sheretz lying on it, you don't have any witnesses. It had a cheskat kashrut for sure. It had a presumption of innocence or purity until the last minute. Okay, it's only when you know that you have this contradictory testimony that's uprooting your cheskat kashrut, that's when you have to start worrying. Because we see that even in a case of deoraitas, he relies on cheskat kashrut. He relies on the presumption of tahora. He relies on the presumption of purity. Unless there's some evidence that calls it into question. And that's what's being dealt with in our sugya.